Thank you all for joining the Australia 4 debate series operating under the sponsorship of the Pearcey Foundation. The Pearcey Foundation acknowledges the Gadigal people and all the traditional custodians who belong to the lands where the Pearcey Foundation and you, our guests, live, work and meet. We acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with us today and their elders past and present, whose stories, traditions and living cultures in this country are a valuable resource, as are those of all who make Australia their home. Together, we are Australia. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the fifth and final event in the Australia 4 debate series. My name is Ian Opperman. I'm the chair of the Australia 4 activity. This series of debates we are ending up with today is the culmination of more than 4 years of effort exploring the issues of the transition to net zero of the energy sector through the lens of data, digital and ICT. First, a little bit about the Pearcey Foundation. The Pearcey Foundation is a non-profit organisation founded in 1998 in memory of the great Australian ICT pioneer, Dr. Trevor Pearcey. The foundation operates broadly across the Australian information and computing and telecommunications sectors, the ICT sector, from celebrating achievements through national and state awards to being involved in debates and public policy on critical national issues such as productivity, the digital economy and national infrastructure. With this series, since 2022, we've been working with partners such as Standards Australia, Engineers Australia, the Australian Computer Society, the CSIRO, universities, regulators, and consumer representatives to try and create a constructive space for this important dialogue about the transition to net zero. The goal of Australia 4 has been to identify a set of commonly agreed challenges and propose ways to address them from a digital and data perspective. The summary of the first phases covering 2022 through to 2024 were released in a communique in May 2024, which you can find on the Pearcey website. In 2024, so last year and this year, Australia 4 continued with workshops in conjunction with those same partners who care deeply about the transition to net zero. We've been addressing issues of putting the consumer at the heart of the future grid, digitisation of the future grid, digital skills needed for future workforce, and the standards required, as well as other important elements of how we actually get there. During each of these workshops, we sought to focus discussions through the lenses of ICT, innovation, and benefit to Australia. Today, this is the fifth and final of those 5 debates where we're debating the recommendations which came from those series of roundtable conversations. And we're looking to ensure that we have an opportunity to really dig into the issue today, which is digitising the grid. Please note, there will be a Slido QR code available for you to participate online, and all of the discussions so far have been really enriched by the power and the depth of the conversation which follows the actual debate itself. Now, today's debate looks at the digitisation of the grid and will be moderated by Professor Neil Horrocks. We're actually very fortunate to have Neil with us today. Neil has more than 25 years experience in the energy and sustainable industries sector and has been a leader in developing programs that engage households and businesses to drive meaningful and beneficial change. He has a number of roles, but it includes program lead for networks at the Race for 2030 CRC. He's also part of the working group for sustainable grid and energy solutions at Energy Queensland. And I encourage you to check out his profile on LinkedIn. Today, as mentioned, this is the final of the series of 5 debates, and we're asking the proposition, we need a giant digital step change to create the consumer's grid. And as said, moderated by Professor Neil Horrocks. So without further ado, Neil, I'll hand over to you.
Ian, thank you. That's wonderful. It's great to be here, and good afternoon, everyone. And thanks for being here. We've got a big crew here already, and we're expecting more as the morning or the afternoon goes on, I should say. The statement we're debating today has been deliberately framed to spark some reaction and thoughtful conversation. It's intentionally provocative, and it asks us to consider the kind of transformation that we believe is necessary to move Australia's energy transition forward at the pace that's required. The proposition that we're talking about today is that a utility-led digitised step change is the right path to the consumer grid. Now, it's not a gentle idea. It rests on 4 quite bold assumptions, and I just want to lay these out clearly before we begin. The first is that it argues that we need a step change in digitisation across the entire whole of energy system. Not a handful of pilots, not gradual refinement, not one region at a time, but a decisive and coordinated move that covers networks, wholesale market, customer market, CER visibility, the digital foundations of genuine transactive models, just so much that needs to be done in the digitization of the consumer's grid. Secondly, it asserts that that step change must be led by the utilities, by the networks, the retailers, and by implication, the system operators that bind these functions together. Third, it argues that any other pathway will be too slow or somehow not as strong. And finally, and implicitly, it argues that this needs to be done and it's the best option for delivering what customers want, the consumer's grid. So these 4 points together form the provocation of the heart of today's debate. Our purpose today is not to accept them uncritically, but to unpack them, unpack the arguments for, the arguments against, and the assumptions hiding beneath both. To help ground this discussion, I wanted to share an example, not from electricity, but from rail. So a few years ago, Queensland Rail reached the limit of what its network could manage. Congestion was rising significantly. There were delays increasing across the network. Safety margins were constraining and tightening the way they ran the business, and the whole system was running on analog signalling and fragmented controls. They tried lots of small improvements for years, but nothing had solved the core problem, and that was the network simply wasn't, first of all, visible as a whole, and both operators and consumers were feeling the strain. So Queensland Rail approved a statewide step change digital transformation. They and they alone introduced a modern digital control system with continuous telemetry, real-time movement authorizations, integrated whole network optimization. It wasn't a pilot or rollout. It was a full-blown digital leap for the entire network. And the results were immediate. The digitization didn't just improve the system, it revealed the system. Bottlenecks were found to be in a different place than they expected. Some of the legacy safety controls and margins were more conservative than they really needed, and hidden capacity emerged that no one had been able to see before. So the improved visibility enabled them to add more services without building new tracks. It made them operate more safely and more efficiently. And importantly, customers benefited significantly. Third parties like Google Maps suddenly could provide accurate and real-time information about transport and different transport options. Others now made it easier to compare cost and time of train trips versus alternatives like driving and using ride shares. Signage at stations became digitised, real-time information that was clearer and more reliable, and customers' trust grew simply because the information they had about the network that they relied on became more consistent and timely. So this is an example of a utility-led digitisation step change for consumers' benefit. It's not that this example proves that utility-led approach is the only pathway, because that's the very question ahead of us today. Some would have argued from that example that the utilities have to lead because they can do it at speed and in a way that no one else can. But others would argue that we could have got more out of that approach if the users could have been involved collaboratively in designing that approach and making it even more useful for the way they want to use the network further. So we're asking you today to consider all this. We want you to participate in this debate. I'll get you, if you could, to please put up the Slido QR code. So today we're going to ask you to cast a vote on what you think about the debate topic. Just your initial view on the proposition that we put at hand, and using the Slido tool. If you scan that code, click on the link, you should be able to get in. And if we go to the next page, what we'd love you to do is to consider putting your name down as you do it. We'd love to know who's asking the questions. If you don't feel like you want to do that, remain anonymous by all means, but it'd be lovely to see who's asking some of the questions. So jump on board and start to post your vote about what you think about our proposal, which is a utility-led digitisation step change is the right path for a consumer's grid. So we'll leave you to start having a vote on what you think about that. The idea of getting you to place this vote early is so that we've got a baseline of the sense of the room prior to starting the conversation. So once we hear from the speakers, and they'll bring perspectives from research operations, consumer advocacy, and digital innovation, we'll then open the floor to your questions, allowing you to test the strength of the things that they're arguing. Just having a look, are we getting any results through yet, Jordan? But I will mention that once we get through all of the question and answers, we'll come back and we'll run this vote again and see if and how the room changes as a result of the voting that you're doing now. Our aim's simple, it's just to see whether the debate shifts the room, whether the stories and the evidence and the arguments move your thinking, whether it sharpens your thinking, or in fact, even if it turns you in the other direction. So that should be pretty interesting.
So only about half of you have voted so far, so let's get a few more votes.
It'd be really nice to see how you go. It's not about winning or losing, it's about understanding how ideas change and when they're, particularly when they're held up to scrutiny. And just while you're doing that also, I just want you to be cognizant of the fact that consumer grid is a key focus of today's debate as well. It is about the consumer's grid. It's about how we make this better for a future of a consumer-led network. Where I am at Race, we're constantly framing our impact research to focus on benefits for consumers in the transition. And I think it's, you know, a valid and a good thing to pursue. We also look at 2050 as an end target, and it's not really an end target, but as an arbitrary target. And we recognise there's probably only 4 more regulatory determinations between now and then, not including the one that we're in now. So for all of the networks involved in this, it means we need some big steps, some really big things in the coming near future. And when you look at the ISP scenarios, the 2 scenarios that the ISP leans on, they envisage that much of the heavy lifting is going to be done in the near-term future as well. So there's much to be done and much to be achieved. I'm just really also interested in the sandbox work that's started to come through. We've seen recently Ausgrid submitted a sandbox for their community power networks. It's got, no doubt, got quite a wide range of responses with some really polarised reviews on that. And in some ways, it's a good indicator of a disruptive proposal, one that creates unease, one that challenges existing business models. Sometimes the status quo is a safe space, and sometimes small integral steps are a safer way to proceed. Sometimes we need to just move out of our comfort space to achieve more. So here we go. How many votes is that, Jordan?
How many votes? Oh, that's 37 of the 50 odd people in the room have voted.
Okay, well, feel free to continue to vote as we go forward. We'd really like to get a sense of how people are feeling about this so that we can compare to where we get to at the end. But I think we should begin. So it's time to meet our combatants. It's a genuine pleasure to bring together the people whose work sits at the heart of Australia's changing energy landscape. Each one brings a different perspective shaped by careers that cross disciplines, sectors and ways of thinking. And together they offer a really rich view of where we're heading. I think they're the perfect combination of speakers to debate today's topic. Our first speaker, supporting the proposition that we do need a utility-led digitisation step change, is Jason Clark, Managing Director of Collab AI. So Jason leads the design and commercialisation of generative AI-based technologies that support industries, including the energy industry, to modernise and unlock new value. With more than 20 years of senior leadership experience, he has guided the growth of high-performing businesses and delivered major operational transformations. Jason also brings deep experience of the electricity sector through senior executive roles at both Ausgrid and AGL, which gives him a really strong understanding of how innovation can be applied within our energy industry, which is an essential service environment. Speaking first out against the proposition, our first speaker for the opposition today will be Michael Dalla Locovo, who's the Executive Manager of Advocacy and Policy at Energy Consumers Australia. Michael's work centres on improving energy outcomes for households and small businesses, with areas of focus that include electricity distribution networks, the integration of EVs and strategies to support energy resilience, A notable achievement for Michael has been his leadership in ECA's recent rule change proposal for integrated distribution system planning, which aims to update and modernise network planning and data requirements to better serve Australian consumers. That step change approach to trying to find ways to do things better. Michael's got a really particularly interdisciplinary background. He's got a PhD in seismic techniques in space exploration, of all things. He's worked as a geophysicist, a physicist in the Australian energy sector, led strategy for a think tank focused at times on animal welfare and in other settings on the governance of new technologies, and he's engaged directly with the democratic process through running for public office. His career gives him a really well-rounded view of technical, social, and political aspects of our energy transition. Supporting Jason on the affirmative side, we'll welcome Simon English after Michael. Simon's an electrical engineer with more than 30 years of experience across operational technology disciplines. That's operational technology as opposed to IT. His career spans a wide range of industries, from oil and gas, airports and pharmaceutical manufacturing, to casinos, which I want to find out more about later, Simon, to correctional facilities. That's probably, I don't know if they're connected, and the electrical distribution sector. Over this time, he's developed rich systems engineering capability and has worked extensively at the intersection where information technology and operational technology meet. With all the challenges and opportunities that brings, Simon now works at City Power, Powercor and United Energy, where he's responsible for helping to map out the future needs of the power network as the pace of the energy transition continues to accelerate through the distribution grid. And last but not least, bringing home the argument for the opposing team will be Sharon Swift, Senior Manager at the UNSW Digital Grid Futures Institute. Sharon is someone who builds bridges between researchers, industry partners and business leaders, helping to bring people, ideas and organisations together in ways that lead to practical, interdisciplinary outcomes. With a career that spans the globe and covers business operations and entrepreneurship, she blends commercial experience with academic understanding in a way that's quite rare. She's particularly passionate about improving energy literacy, encouraging consumer empowerment, inspiring young people to explore STEM pathways and supporting experienced professionals to share their knowledge. She works also to shape career pathways into decarbonisation, recognising how essential worker development is meeting the climate challenge. So there are our 4 speakers today, a really good group, I'm sure you'll agree, and I don't see any reason to delay things any further. So I'll simply invite Jason to start off the debate. Jason?
Thanks, Neil. The consumer grid is already here. There's 4 million rooftop systems and counting. The cheaper home battery programs are leading to rapid installation of small-scale battery systems. Right now, maybe 1 in 5 Australian households with rooftop solar is being curtailed. Our networks run at barely 30% utilisation. AEMO says we need 10 gigawatts of new capacity connected every year, but managed only 4.4 last year. This isn't tomorrow's crisis, it's today's reality. The question is no longer if we need to digitise, the question is, who needs to lead it? AEMO's control room tells the story. On a typical day, demand can swing by 35% in an hour. Batteries are chasing price signals and discharge early and then run flat at peak. An aging coal plant trips, diesel fires up. That's not a crisis, it's an ordinary day. Utility-led digitisation changes this. With machine learning and predictive control, utilities can pre-position resources, forecast congestion, and optimize across thousands of variables in real time. AEMO's 25 Electricity Network Options Report confirms that digital optimization can double effective network utilization, turning 30% to 60% without new poles and wires. That's a difference between a $100 billion hardware build versus a $1 billion software upgrade. Only utilities have the visibility, data, and regulatory responsibility to orchestrate the system end to end. The consumer grid is dividing Australia into 2 groups, the haves and the have-nots. The haves are those with solar, batteries, and EVs earning from their assets, and those without still pay for stability, but really get none of the benefit. Utilities are the only entities with a universal service obligation. They connect everyone, urban renters, rural pensioners, large industries alike. When utilities lead digitisation, every postcode participates. Community batteries and virtual power plants can share value with renters and small businesses, and demand response programs can reward participation without owning hardware. AEMO is now explicitly including distribution network opportunities to aggregate consumer energy resources. AEMO knows that without network leadership, digitization fragments, market-led opportunities optimized for profit, utility-led approaches optimized for equity and reliability. Coal plants are closing. We must connect more than twice the annual capacity to keep pace, and there's no time for market experimentation. Utilities already manage 14 million connections, operate 24/7 control rooms, and maintain the standards and safety frameworks that keep the lights on. Layering digital orchestration onto that infrastructure is evolution, not revolution. When utilities lead, digitization moves at the scale required. When markets lead, we get algorithmic trading that fails when needed most. Batteries chasing price, not stability. Utility leadership delivers both speed and stewardship. Every data point leads to one conclusion. Complexity without coordination equals crisis. The consumer grid is growing by 400,000 new systems each year. These millions of assets will either be orchestrated or they'll create chaos. So the choice is binary. Utility-led digitization that harmonizes millions of resources into a symphony of stability, or fragmented markets that lead to chaos. The path is clear, the technology is ready, and the mandate is urgent. The consumer grid demands utility-led digitization, not tomorrow, but today.
Thank you, Jason. Strong points there. I think we'll move straight into hearing from Michael.
Thanks, Neil, and thanks, Jason, for kicking us off. Imagine trusting your personal data to a company that you trust less than your bank or your supermarket. That's exactly what we're asking consumers to do with their energy data under a utility-led digitalization. Today, I'm going to show you why consumer-led digitalization isn't just the right path, it's the only path that ensures the grid truly serves the people who pay for it. Our network data rules predate the iPhone. They were designed for a time when electricity flowed in one direction, from large thermal power plants to homes and factories. Today, 1/3 of Australian homes are power plants, and our market operator is expecting the amount of rooftop solar to grow fourfold by 2050. These prosumers aren't passive recipients anymore. They're active grid participants who are generating, storing, and trading energy themselves. Yet utilities are still treating them like they did in 1950. Recognizing this fundamental shift requires that consumers lead the way. So we do need a step change. It's called getting consumers in the room. Dr. Kerry Schott, who chaired the Energy Security Board, said in 2020, "We now have more data than ever, but it isn't being fully utilized and shared in a way that benefits consumers." 5 years later, I believe this still remains true. Digitalization is an enormous opportunity for consumers. Peer-to-peer energy trading can give solar owners more value for their electrons while unlocking cheap energy for renters and apartment dwellers who can't have solar and driving down network costs for everyone. We have compelling evidence of the benefits of this from around the world, including the Green Button Connect program in California, which gives consumers control over their energy data, enabling them to authorize third parties to access their usage information for mutual benefit. Around 300,000 customers have, with Ohm Connect, used this to earn over $40 a year by reducing their consumption during peak events, while saving the grid 100 megawatts, which is equivalent to about 2 peaker plants. We're not talking about everyone optimizing every single second of their energy use. No one wants to do that. I mean, I do, but most people have better things to do. It's really about consumers taking ownership of their data and receiving fair value in a way that benefits everyone. But this data-driven opportunity relies on consumers feeling that they have autonomy and ownership. Consumers bear all the risk, but they don't feel like they have control or receive fair value. When a data breach occurs, who suffers? When dynamic pricing disadvantages vulnerable households, who pays? When algorithms decide that your power gets cut during peak demand, whose medical equipment stops working? Consumers bear all the risk but have none of the control. They pay for the network infrastructure. They pay for the smart meters. They pay for the transition. Yet utility-led digitalization would have them as passive data subjects rather than active stakeholders. This isn't just unfair, it's economically inefficient. Innovation requires open access, not utility gatekeeping. History teaches us that innovation comes from unexpected places. Bill Gates said he saw little commercial potential for the internet in 1994. And the founder of Digital Equipment Corporation said no one would ever want a home computer in 1977. Utilities defining all use cases of energy data is like IBM trying to predict how people would use personal computers back in the 70s. Consumer-led digitalization creates an open ecosystem where thousands of innovators can unlock and create value that we can't even imagine. Lock this data behind utility walls, and we lock our innovation. As a former US president once said, let me be clear, we need utilities. Their expertise in grid management is irreplaceable. But there's a difference between partnership and control. Consumer-led does not mean consumer-only. It means consumers set the terms of engagement, define privacy boundaries, and maintain sovereignty over their data, while utilities provide the technical backbone. What we need is co-design. All of us in this room are consumers, so ask yourself this: do you want to be left out? The question is not whether digitalization will transform our grid. It's who will lead it and who will control that transformation. Will we repeat the mistakes of social media where users became the product? Or will we create a truly democratic energy system where consumers own their own data, direct innovation, and share the value that they create? The path to me is clear. Consumer-led digitalization isn't just right, it's necessary.
Wow, thanks, Michael. There's two very good arguments for and against to start us off. Well done, both of you. We'll now move on, Simon, to you to support Jason's first arguments. Off you go.
Thanks, Neil, and welcome everybody. The first speaker for the negative team, Michael, has just tried to convince you that utilities shouldn't lead the digitalization effort because, you know, utilities can't be trusted and their primary goal is to exploit the consumer. However, as my colleague Jason referenced, the need to scale and scale quickly means that the resources and skills of the utility sector are needed with the benefits of regulation to put in place so those monopolies do focus on making the consumer's grid deliver the benefits to the consumer. And I think that's our key point here. Let's look a little bit more in detail about why digitalization is important and how it really helps consumers, both large and small, get more out of their electricity connection. As an analogy, think back to the old telco landline days. It was really good at giving customers a single capability. You could talk on the phone at home or work, but that's it. Why would you need any more? Electricity is kind of the same. I'm connected, but I buy it from the grid, job done. However, in the telco space, there was a realization that moving from the analog world to the digital world unlocked a whole bunch of new capabilities and services. This was based on the core digital backbone that the utilities provided to unlock these new customer benefits, such as mobile phones, data and apps. Electricity can go through the same metamorphosis if we put the right digital backbone in to unlock a lot more capability when you're connected to the electricity grid. So let's unpack a few examples. First, I'm an EV driver, but I'm not at home. I plug my car into the nearest power pole EV charger, and it's virtually like being at home. Digitalization means that my charging and energy use is billed back to my home retailer at the rates as if I was actually charging at home. I've now virtualized my connection point to allow my energy use to be portable. Let's look at another example. Distribution networks design and build the physical network based upon traditional analog electricity limits. Each consumer is fundamentally assigned a portion of capacity, and those limits are fixed, which is why solar PV approvals have very rigid limits. So for example, 5 kilowatts per phase per home. If we apply a digital overlay and flexibility into that physical connection process, then similar to what the airlines learned many years ago, that you could unlock more capability or more capacity by overselling the number of airline seats. Distribution networks can unlock significantly more capacity in the local grid, allowing more consumers to connect more stuff easily and maximize the value of their connection. Utilities want consumers to be able to make the most of their PVs, home batteries, EVs, and smart appliances. A digital backbone enables this to happen. I think the third point, as an example, is that digitalization doesn't just mean data analytics. It's not just about privacy. It's about the whole way the technology mindset moves to solve problems within the power industry. Climate change will have a massive impact on local communities, and electricity underpins a modern functioning society. The benefits of inverter technology and local generation storage and coordination mean that communities can help each other through local resilience measures. The old way was to wait until the distribution network fixed the network upstream of you, and then power could flow to your community. With a decentralized and digitally orchestrated grid, this means the utility works with the community so that the local energy generated can support the community until the grid upstream is fixed. A digitally enabled electricity network means that we should have less impacts for consumers and more resilience in communities. Utilities have the financial and technical capabilities to do the step change. It's in their interest to unlock the benefits for consumers. Like our use of the mobile phones, to get real value, we don't need to understand about mobile phone towers, cybersecurity, and optimization of capacity. We just use our phones and let the telco utility manage the infrastructure on our behalf. Let's get cracking in the electricity sector to do the same and give consumers what they want, the consumer's grid.
Brilliant. Thanks, Simon. Another lot of really good points. It's getting tight. Sharon, welcome aboard. I'd love to hear what you've got to say against the proposition.
Well, I completely disagree, and I am going to offer four points that we need to really think about. So a utility-led digitalization step change may sound efficient and coordinated, but it's the wrong path to a truly consumer-centered grid. The future grid, as my colleague Michael mentioned, needs to be co-created, but also decentralized and trust-driven, not dictated from the top down by entities already struggling with legitimacy and adaptability. So I'm going to kick off with trust. Trust in large institutions, governments, corporations, and yes, utilities included, is at an all-time low. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, measuring what matters trust in national government, a study from last year, only 1 in 3 Australians believe the federal government can be trusted to do the right thing. That's not great. And overall trust, according to Edelman Trust Barometer Australia from this year, overall trust in major institutions has fallen to just 49%. When those same institutions announce a new digitalization agenda, it's not seen as progress, it's seen as control. And this fear is not irrational. We're watching data breaches, privacy failures, cost blowouts in every sector. If utilities lead the digital future, many consumers will assume that it's for profit and not for people. My second point covers the really important point that we all need to think about, and that's equity. Rapid innovation already risks leaving people behind. Yes, digitalization is, we take it for granted, but not every person is literate in digital applications. The 2025 Australian Digital Inclusion Index shows that while overall digital participation is rising, older Australians, low-income households, and those in regional and remote areas remain significantly less connected and confident online. And that's millions of people effectively excluded from the benefits of a digital economy. If digitalization is utility-led, the design will naturally favor the majority and not the margins. We're going to end up with a digital divide that becomes an energy divide, where those with connectivity, technology, and capital reap the rewards and everyone else pays for the privilege of being included. Thirdly, I'm going to cover the point of independence. We're seeing a growing movement, as we've all touched on, of consumers choosing to opt out of centralized systems altogether. More than 1 in 3 households in Australia now generate their own electricity through rooftop solar, and installations continue to rise by over 20,000 systems a month. People are doing this because they want control, they want predictability, and they want to reduce exposure to grid volatility and price shocks. And a utility-led model ignores this reality and risks pushing even more people to disconnect, literally and figuratively. Lastly, pace and pressure. The world is already moving at a relentless speed with geopolitical tensions, climate anxiety, cost of living pressures, and technological disruption from AI are reshaping daily life. And it's happening in real time at a pace that's absolutely relentless. 3 in 4 Australians say that they feel overwhelmed by the rate of change in technology and society. And again, that's from Edelman's Trust Barometer from this year. In that context, another step change driven from above and rolled out at breakneck speed isn't progress, it's alienation. The more utilities accelerate, the more consumers will dig in their heels, feeling left behind, or left out. So yes, digitalization is essential, but who leads it and how it's done is going to determine whether we end up with a consumer empowering grid or just a digital replica of an old centralized model. If we want a truly consumers grid, the answer isn't a utility-led revolution, it's a collaborative evolution that's built on transparency, equity, shared trust, and not just technology.
Oh, that's excellent. Thanks, Sharon. That's really, really good. Well, some really excellent arguments there. Supporting the utilities and taking a lead. We heard Jason Simon talking about equity and benefits and saying that every postcode gets to participate when the utilities lead. Michael and Sharon said, well, they might all participate, but that doesn't mean everyone in the postcode gets to participate. Maybe the majority get to participate. We heard that customers hold all the risk and they pay for it, but we also heard it's in the best interest for utilities to make sure that cost and risk is kept low. We heard that utilities have the capability and the resources to scale, but then we wonder whether they can deliver what customers really want. There is certainly 2 sides to every argument. So now's the time for rebuttals of today's presentations, and I'll start by inviting Jason and Simon to have a say. Gents?
Do you want to start off, Jason, or I can?
Yeah, sure. Trust. The largest point collapses under its own logic. The negative side argues that utilities shouldn't lead digitization because trust in institutions is low. But that's exactly why utilities must lead, because utilities are the only actors who operate under mandatory regulation, transparency requirements, audit frameworks, ombudsman oversight, and price control. If you don't have utilities leading, who is left to set up the digital rules? Startups, app developers, foreign tech platforms, private aggregators accountable to no one? Utilities don't control consumers' data. They're bound by custodians, bound by law. With the consumer-led model, simply does not provide. If trust is low, the answer is regulated, accountable leadership, not the digital Wild West. The second point's equity. Their argument ignores the biggest source of inequity, market fragmentation. The negative side claims a utility-led market will leave people behind, but the opposite is true. Only utilities have a universal service obligation. The obligation is to serve every postcode. The mandate to support vulnerable customers and the infrastructure to ensure no one is excluded. A consumer-led open ecosystem model benefits digitally literate, wealthy and well-connected consumers. It creates a 2-speed energy system where households with tech capital and digital gain that might get more value than anyone else. Look what's already happened with solar. Independence. Their interpretation of a consumer empowerment is factually backwards. The negative side argues that more people are opting out of grid because they want independence, so utilities shouldn't lead. But people are opting out because the current system isn't digitized, not because utilities are involved. When utilities digitize, social restrictions fall, battery value increases, export limits relax, coordination meets more consumer business benefit, not less. A digitally orchestrated grid strengthens consumer independence by making every rooftop battery EV more valuable. And the most ironic part, a fully consumer-led system without coordination accelerates disconnection, which increases costs for low-income houses who can't disconnect. Utility-led digitization is how we avoid that. Simon, I have a few more. I'm happy to keep going, but I'll pass.
I was just going to say what he said. I probably couldn't say it as elegant, but I think at a practical level, some of the things that came up from the negative team around the equity piece, I think is a really good point. As Jason said, utilities are regulated, particularly the distribution networks are regulated. And so any solution is enabled for everyone. When I mentioned things like better resilience methods around climate change, that's rolled out to everyone. The digital backbone impacts and helps everybody in that, whether they have solar or they don't, whether they have a battery or an EV or they don't. The EV example I gave with the, virtualizing the charging and saying it belongs to my power bill. Again, the concept there is it doesn't matter what postcode you live in. It doesn't matter where you are. Those services are made for everybody. To Jason's really clear point, if you let the market and startups do stuff, and you're seeing this right now, you end up with, where can I make money? Where can I make focus? Distribution and even retailers to a certain extent are governed by a regulatory framework that focuses on giving the customer value. You've seen it with the 3 for 3 that the federal government's come out with. These sorts of things are all geared around that everybody benefits. And I think that's the key thing here is to deliver on that promise, you need to have a group that is regulated, managed, and is incentivized to make sure the customer wins and the community grid is the top of mind in terms of the solution.
Beautiful. Thanks.
And the last one, if I may, Neil, the core contradiction in the argument of the negative is that Michael demanded consumer-led digitization, but Sharon has said that the change is moving too fast and people are overwhelmed. You cannot have a consumer-led, decentralized, open data, free for all, and protect consumers from complexity, digital literacy barriers, and decision fatigue. Our model solves that contradiction. Utilities coordinate complexity on behalf of consumers, not instead of them. The affirmative position stands. Trust requires regulation. Equity requires universal access. Independence requires coordination. Pace requires systems stewardship, and innovation requires a platform, not fragmentation. It comes from a digitally orchestrated system where utilities provide the backbone and consumers receive the benefit.
Thank you both. That was a very good rebuttal. I'm glad I'm sitting here facilitating and not sitting in your seats, because given a week to set an argument, that's great, but given a couple of minutes to rebut another argument, that is serious skill. Well done. Just giving you a little bit more time, Sharon and Michael, but if you're ready to go, let's hear what you've got to say.
Well, look, Jason mentioned that AMO said we only achieved around 44% of required new capacity last year. So I agree with you, Jason. Something clearly isn't working. The transition has been utility-led, but maybe it is time to give the consumer a go. Consumer energy resources tend to be the cheapest form of capacity there is. I want to work with Jason to unlock the rooftop solar, household battery, electric vehicles, and demand response that everyday Aussies can offer to benefit everybody. I think what we heard from Simon is that we need utilities to lead the way because they can move faster. Move fast and break things. How's that going for consumers? I'm all for urgency, but I think consumers deserve more than that. How about move fast and fix things? I think we also heard from Simon that utilities need to provide the digital backbone to unlock the use cases that consumers want and will benefit them. I'm actually not sure which side Simon was arguing for here, because that sounds pretty consumer-led to me. Jason also said low trust in regulated utilities is why we need regulated utilities to lead the way. So I will let that oxymoron case for status quo speak for itself and pass on to my learned colleague, Sharon.
Let's be clear. Consumers are being, asked to carry the cost of this transition. Households are spending tens of thousands of dollars on rooftop solar, on EVs. They're asking to invest, and a utility-led model, once they're connected, if they're to lead it, they just lose control. Their data usage patterns, even when they export or store power, dictated by algorithms and pricing systems, yes, that are highly regulated, but by whom? By the elite. It's not empowerment, that's outsourcing responsibility while centralizing control. And we can't keep asking people to invest in the system only to tell them that they're passengers. We can't ask them to continue to fund the future while utilities are at the steering wheel. And it's not participation, that's basically permission. So I think what we're arguing on our side is that we've both got skin in the game and we need to do this collaboratively and not saying that it's one or the other. So yes, we need to act as partners, not proprietors, because yeah, who is really powering it? It's a partnership, right? We've got 30% of households that are really, contributing to this answer, and they need to have some say in this. It can't just be one or the other.
Thank you all. Part of me reflects that I'm glad this is an online event. It was originally planned to be in person, but had we done that, there's every chance that Michael and Jason might have leapt on each other, Jerry Springer style, which would have been good, interesting to watch. I probably would have had to pull them apart, so it's good that it didn't happen. But thank you all. Great rebuttals, excellent conversation, and some really strong thinking done about the issues. Been really good, thoughtful, and engaging discussion. All of the contributions are really interesting, and they've touched on really important choices facing us as we transition. And it's also identified that it's not just a technical challenge, it's a structural, cultural, and governance shift that shapes who benefits, who participates, and who decides. So our goal today wasn't to reach agreement, but to surface these tensions, and clearly we have, which is great. Well done for all the speakers in doing that. In a moment, we're going to ask you to vote again on the proposition to see whether the debate has shifted thinking in this space. But for right now, let's move into a Q&A. You'll note, if you've still got your Slido open, that there is a tab at the top for the poll and there's a tab on the top for Q&A. Feel free to get into that Q&A session and section and start asking questions. And I'm going to pass now over to Jordan Green, the Deputy Chair of the Pearcey Foundation Board, to guide the discussion and take questions. Jordan?
Thanks very much, Neil, and apologies for my transparency. But we want everybody to see through. Okay, the first question that people like is actually quite a good one from Ben Beattie. Every consumer opting into solar and batteries is opting out of financially contributing to the electricity system. With the electricity system getting larger and costlier and more people avoiding their share of system costs, who ends up paying?
I'm happy to have a go at that one, if you want. So I suppose the first bit there is we've got to stop looking at people with solar and a battery as the enemy, and they are just making a consumer choice. So it's a bit like saying you provide public transport in a city, therefore you can't have a car. Like, that's just not practical. We live in a democracy where people have choice. The challenge here is that we used to, and we currently pay for the electrical infrastructure based upon the volume of energy that used to flow from the top of the network to the bottom of the network to the consumer, because it was one way. We have to change that process. We have to have a different type of pricing mechanism where value for the connection is important. And as Jason and I were talking about, the whole reason for the digital backbone is to provide more services. And then you end up in a situation where consumers want to stay connected. They see value. Even something as simple as energy for 3 hours free in the middle of the day tends to drive a behavior. Oh, there's a reason to stay connected. So what we need to do as an industry is make sure that we're adding more value than just you get electricity, and we provide a pricing and charging mechanism that isn't based upon the 1980s model of volumetric energy started at transmission. I think that will go a long way to changing how we fund the grid.
I could jump in there as well. So I think one thing I'd like to call out is many people don't realize that network costs are recovered largely through volumetric charges. So that means as you consume less energy from the grid, say because you have solar or a battery, you pay less of the network fixed costs. But obviously there are still benefits to a consumer with solar of the grid, because it means they can export solar to the grid, for example. They have reliability and backup. So clearly I think we need to have a look at our network tariffs still fit for purpose to incentivize the best outcomes for all consumers. But just keep in mind that the more solar and the more battery we have, the cheaper the grid becomes overall to operate, the cheaper the network becomes. Because, as I mentioned, consumer energy resources tend to be the cheapest form of capacity because for a number of reasons, but one is they tend to be closest to load. If you have a lot of solar on roofs in Sydney, that's cheaper than having to put a large utility scale solar plant somewhere in Western New South Wales and have a lot of transmission to transport that energy to Sydney. So there are benefits to all consumers from some consumers having consumer energy resources that are not necessarily being reflected with the current market incentives. And so I think we need to have a look at network tariffs and market incentives for CER, but broadly speaking, more CER is good for everybody.
Yeah, my only build on that is I think one of the few certainties in energy is that we're going to see a lot more solar on roofs and a lot more batteries in people's houses. And so we've really got, I think, a stark choice. We can think about how we are able to access that for the benefit of everyone, or we maintain and put the way we have always operated with the same lens, and that's going to lead to an even more inequitable outcome. And so, you know, Michael's points are spot on, which is if we can have that generation really close to the load source, and if you think about the grid, particularly the low voltage grid as a hotel, the occupancy is so low. You know, if we can improve that occupancy level, like a hotel, we're going to get much cheaper costs for everyone. And I acknowledge that's not easy to do, but that's one of the things we have to tackle because that's one of the few certainties. You know, we're leading the world in CER, and that's just going to continue to happen. So we've got to tackle this.
Okay, so in the interest of, we've got lots of questions coming through, so let's move on. One that's popped to the top now is a fairly simple question, and again, as we answer this, let's keep in focus the digitalisation aspect of today's debate. Why would a household want to cede control of its assets to a utility, Lisa Schutz asks, regardless of whether it's optimal or not? And related to that, I'm going to bring in Mark's question about why do we feel that consumers cannot be trusted with their own data? And do any of you actually have access to your own data?
I'm happy to address Lisa's bit to start with, if someone wants to follow me. I think it's a really good point, and I think that's one of the narratives that we've got to get better as an industry in explaining. There's going to be choice for consumers in the home. At one end, it's literally do your own thing, buy whatever's left from the grid. There is no control of your devices. In the middle, there's an orchestration bit where there's some rules and some guardrails saying don't go above this, don't go below that. So we're calling a dynamic operating envelope. You operate within that framework, go for it, do what you like. And then the third one is that you want to be price responsive, or you want to be controlled by an aggregator because you want to take advantage of a market price. So you want to use technology to actually have some sort of market or financial impact. So I think the important part is it's not a one size fits all, that in fact, it's really a choice based upon what the consumer, how they want to engage with the broader issue. And I think that's really important. At the moment, there's a small group of people that potentially want to sign up and participate actively in the market. There's a larger group that want to just do their own thing within the range of what they're allowed to do. And then there's a really, really small group that simply says, look, I'm quite passive and I don't want to be engaged in this. I want to just do my own thing. We've got to support all three choices.
Anyone else want to have a go at either the aspect of ceding control or whether or not we actually have our data and what we might do with it?
I've got a couple of thoughts there. So I think, yeah, ceding control, it's a really important point because we know that consumers do have trust issues. We're seeing relatively low uptake of virtual power plants from consumers because there's concerns around trust and control, which is a shame because virtual power plants have the opportunity to benefit everybody, including the person participating. And there's a quote I really like from a survey done in Canada on people's on smart charging and virtual vehicle to grid of electric vehicles, which is kind of symptomatic of the general sentiment. People are concerned that when if they plug into to V2G, they're worried that, oh, what happens if I go downstairs and I go to use my car and the grid has sucked up all the energy because I've given up my control. So whether or not that's realistic or common, that is a concern that consumers have. And so we have potentially an education challenge here, I think, to try and show consumers the benefits, but also it's a challenge of trust, and it's on industry and government and frankly consumer advocates to try and help repair and build that trust. Just a brief note on the other question, which was around I wasn't sure if that was directed at us personally, but personally I do have access to my own energy data through my retailer app. Because I have a smart meter, but it's not real or live, real-time or live data. I get that data about 2 days after the fact. So that's not just bad for me, because I could use that to more efficiently optimize my energy use. It's bad for everybody. And that's why ECA has lodged a rule change request to ensure that consumers have real-time access to their energy data, and the AMC is progressing that rule change now.
Can I just put a clarification over this question? I think it's really interesting. Seeding control, I entirely understand the purpose of that question. It's a great question. Do the debaters think that maybe the complexity or perceived complexity of our energy system might have an impact on how consumers might view that question?
Yes, very much so. I think we've done a pretty poor job as an industry making it simple for people. Look at tariffs, look at the complexity, time of use is okay, demand charges were horrific. We've not done a particularly great job in explaining to the public in a nice, simple, easy way to work. I think that's a really important point. So this concept of control, even though it's not actually really real, that will be the perception because people don't hear anything else. In a vacuum, other voices come in. So I think it is on the industry to be much more open about what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think we overcomplicate things enormously as an industry. Like virtual power plant is my case in point. I've just dropped 20 grand on a battery, and you're going to do what? So I'm going to give you power to do what? Whereas what you're seeing is innovative models like NRN and those type of organizations who are flipping that on its head. Obviously, Amber Electric as well. So I share the view that over time, as people understand this, and hopefully as an industry, we can do a much better job of simplifying and explaining what we're actually talking about, because everyone on this call will be aligned to the industry, and most of us will be electricity nerds. So we understand it, but most people don't. And just trying to actually have a really simplistic way of explaining the value that we can create at a societal level if we can access things at certain times. I think it's really as simple as that, and we do a good job of it. We'll stop a huge overbuild, which ultimately I think as Sharon made really well, people will end up paying for it. So we're all going to end up paying for it, and if we overbuild, we're all going to pay for that.
Okay, so I'm going to go next to, again, I'm going to try and combine a couple of questions to make sure we get everybody in on this. Heather has asked, I think this is not a delivery question, it's a governance question. So there's Heather, originally placed digital infrastructure in the physical architecture part of the mental model of the grid, but now thinks it's part of the regulatory architecture, that tools have been implemented to manage the grid, but how is that actually governed? And how are the local and household optimization levels governed? And do they need to be governed locally, or do they, as the debate has challenged, do they need to be governed at a different level? And I'm going to combine that with something that Lisa, again, has put forward, which is that she suggests the data layer of Australia's data plumbing, the problems and the issues that we see there are not only limited to the energy sector. They also affect banking and government services and everything else. So why would we try to solve for energy as a silo? So two things. How are we looking at the digital elements from the governance point of view? And why are we doing that only within the energy sector? Have I made
I'm happy to
complex?
tackle the second one first, which is the energy sector. So I think if we look at what we can now, so the technology we now have available to us to unlock value out of data we've never had before. Right. So, I work full time in generative AI, and it will completely transform the way all of our services work. And the challenge with looking at energy and then saying the whole of government, I think was the comment, is it's the classic example of how do you transform an organization, or how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is one bite at a time, right? If you try to do everything in one go, it's indigestion. I think over time we will completely transform the way we deliver services and governance through all the layers of government. But we have to start somewhere. And look, I think we only need to look at the news of the last 24 hours of what's happening. Energy is the front and center of the cost of living crisis. So of course there's a lot of focus going on it. That's my view.
Anyone else want to address the governance angle?
Yeah, I suppose one of the things I appreciate, again, we're not particularly transparent, but AEMO, the distribution networks, transmission networks, and retailers do get together quite regularly. And because it's a regulated environment, there is a governance framework. There's quite significant rules put over how data, even today. So that's how CDR exists. That's why, for example, the what's called the DER register, which is effectively your home, when you put your home solar on, the networks collect that data and give it to AEMO for market modeling purposes. Retailers aren't allowed to see it. There are already quite good rules in place to protect the public's data and only use it for the things it needs to be used for. It's just that it's not a basis by the public. So that's to a certain extent why there's a real benefit in having the industry. When I say the industry, the foundational structures, AEMO, the networks, for example, heavily involved in delivering the digital infrastructure and managing the process, because we are regulated, and therefore those governance processes are baked into the rules we have to deal with.
Darren, it's a really interesting question, because most of us here who are in the industry go to work 8 hours a day to think about these things and talk about these things and consider what the consumers might like around this. But trust is a big issue, and they don't have the time to engage like industry does. And it's an impossible thing to consider how we would get consumers to be a part of this. But I don't know if you've got any thoughts on how we get them into the discussion.
Ultimately, electricity is a commodity. It's a bit of a grudge purchase, but at the same time, we have higher expectations of, we want to power our EV, we want to power, we want to turn on the lights or cook our dinner at whatever time, and we don't want the inconvenience of having to, just rely on other people to make all of those decisions for us. We want independence, and we want that, that transparency. And when we talk about regulation and, very good points about the fact that, we pay people to regulate and to come up with rules and whatever. And I think as consumers, sometimes we think, well, are you really the best people to be making these decisions for me? And, I'd rather take matters into my own hands and not trust you, especially given all of the cybersecurity hacks and, the 000 issues. There seems to be every single day something comes up with how an entity that's perceived to be in control or should be trusted with my data and things that affect me personally. It just doesn't engender that sort of trust. And I think a lot of people are just opting out of that, and they don't want to overthink it. They just want the power on at the end of the day. So if there is a capacity for people to make their own decisions and have that own governance and take matters into their own hands, they are going to trust their solar installer or their battery installer, to have, control of that consumption and that generation at the end of the day. Those are my 2 cents.
Okay, I'd like to just sort of insert a little bit here from our earlier discussions, because I think it's very relevant to the point and the comment Sharon's just made. Let's remember that consumers are not only the affluent residential consumers who can afford to put solar cells and batteries on their home and have an EV in their driveway. There are all of the residential consumers who don't have that option, And importantly, there are all the commercial and industrial consumers. So when you start thinking about the debate of where is the technology, who is in control, what are the benefits, it's not just about, am I going to let them turn off my hot water heater? It's, if I'm running a factory, who's going to control what goes on with the electricity that I'm generating from that huge bank of solar cells on the roof of my factory and the batteries that I have installed? So I think the challenge that we're seeing with this digitalization debate is we have to really understand it's not just about the select few households. It's about the broader economy. So I just wanted to bring that
Yeah,
forward.
it's a good point, Jordan, and Jason will hopefully back me up on this. Is that again specific around distribution networks? And give you a really good example. You know, we don't think of customers in terms of, like, as you said, that we actually go, are you a solar customer? Are you a battery customer, a solar battery customer? Do you not have any of those? Are you a small to medium enterprise, so local shops, you know, that sort of corner store type business? Are you a major commercial industrial? Are you a remote or rural customer, so at the end of a swirl line or a remote country village? Are you a vulnerable customer, which means, you know, you need to have life support requirements or some other issues that affect you? Each of those segments of customers is treated so differently in terms of brought into the broader mix of how we do tariffs, how we think about network design, how we provide services under that regulatory framework. So I do think that there's a recognition within at least parts of the industry that's taken into consideration. What I don't think we're very good at is talking to people about it. We don't talk about it publicly. We don't really share that stuff publicly. And so I think that's the bit that's got to change. Is we're going to be more open and say we do these things and we think about these things.
Okay,
Yeah,
well, again,
I agree. I think inherently distribution networks are very risk adverse. That they have very stringent requirements as to what they need to deliver every day. And Sharon mentioned they provide an essential service. So I think being more open and collaborative is what's required to actually solve this, and that's from all parties. So we need to work together collaboratively to try to solve it. It's a wickedly complex problem. And we need to bring all the parties together, and it's really easy to say and really difficult to do.
I think I mentioned this in our original call when we were setting up this debate, is that literacy is so important. And I think that, you know, touches on what Simon and everyone else, and Jordan, you looking like a ghost is really freaking me out. Just as an FYI, I'm not sure if anyone else is experiencing that, but I just need to call that out. But yeah, literacy, and, you know, the fact that we make it so complicated. We don't make it complicated. We just assume that everyone has that base level of literacy. And I think I was inspired earlier on this year by a trip I made to Malaysia and Singapore, and I've mentioned this to my colleagues on the call, but for the wider group, you know, Malaysia has made it its, you know, the government has made it its business to unpoliticize energy as a topic, and literacy is really at the core for every citizen in places like Malaysia. So, you know, what as a nation does Australia need to do? You know, we take digitalization away from the conversation totally. It's just energy and the transition. I think if you ask 10 different people, you'll probably get 10 different responses, you know, about what the energy transition is. And that comes back to that, you know, low socioeconomic, you know, marginalized communities, you know, can't really afford to think about it. And it's not really up to the elites to make decisions on this. And what as a country should we be doing to build better awareness of what is actually going on? Because ultimately people just want the lights on. And I think sometimes we overthink it. And, you know, yeah, so it is that wider literacy. And digitalization is just one other extra layer of understanding and awareness and literacy on top of what is already a complex problem. And I think that's what I'm trying to say, is that, you know, that trust and that equity, you know, really need to be considered, because it's not equitable if we layer on digitalization on top of what is already a complex issue.
Great. All right. Well, and for everyone on the call, please keep in mind that Slido is not just for asking questions, but as you can see, if you've been looking, you can engage in conversations around those questions through the Slido, regardless of whether we bring it forward immediately to the live debate. So please feel free to do that, because it's very helpful to everybody. And the next question comes from the nefarious, infamous Tim Ryan. He's suggesting that we have a definition problem with the word utility, and that DNSPs, the distribution network service providers, are the middle ground between the retailers and the gentailers, and that he believes that the DNSPs should be the digital partners with the consumers. That is, the demand side is where all of the flexibility lives. And can the DNSPs deliver for consumers and for the system, that is the community as a whole, through this digital partnership? So who is on whose team? And Mark Purcell emphasizes in his comments on this that the utility, or the electric company, for most of us is just the energy system. Most consumers don't look for generators and transmission and distribution and retail and all the other bits and pieces. We just sit at the other end wanting to plug something into a power socket and expecting power to appear. So the definition and the role of DNSPs and the opportunity for that digital integration with consumers is really what the question is about, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll start off. Maybe Michael, you got some views from a ECA perspective. Really, this comes down to, there's this thing called the distribution system operator, which is really going to be the entity that is that linkage with the customer and how we manage the lower parts of the network in terms of coordination. Effectively, it'll be the owner and manager of that digital infrastructure. It's still not clear to everybody in a regulatory sense as to who is the DSO and where that sits in that sort of makeup of all those different groups. It's an active discussion at the governmental level right now. And I think that's one of the challenges, is that I think everybody recognizes the DSO function is what's needed to sort of supercharge this and make it work really well. The discussion has been around, where does it live?
I might just add a little bit, which is to say, I don't know if you can tell, but I was hamming it up a little bit for the purposes of the debate. But in reality, the part that I believe the most is that I do think, it's both in terms of the debate. It's utilities and consumers and consumer advocates and government working together. I think broadly speaking, distribution networks are moving in the right direction. They're trying more innovative stuff and more opportunities to partner with consumers and to give consumers opportunities to share data and to benefit. So, I think keep it up is what I'll say, and I just hope there's more opportunities for utilities to work together with consumers. There's a big opportunity there, so I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I agree. I think they talk about the missing middle if I was representing the distribution industry, but I think there's a huge I go back to the hotel analogy because I think people understand it better. In terms of, we have huge amounts of occupancy available on our distribution grids at the low voltage level. Huge. They're used very infrequently, maybe 30% average occupancy. So that means that building is 30% full and 70% sitting there waiting for someone to use it. We build those distribution businesses or those networks for those peak events that happen very, very infrequently. If you look over a year, and Simon would be able to give me the statistic, per maybe a couple of hours.
A couple of hours.
Year.
Yeah, exactly.
If we can actually start to think about how we move not only the demand but the supply around and bring that down, then we avoid overbuilding the network and we get better utilization, which ultimately goes to our pricing discussion earlier, which is better for everyone. And I think also acknowledging, hamming it up for the debate, was we need both parties to come to the table with that, right? So we need to create incentives from particularly distribution businesses and networks to be able to incentivize people to do the right thing at the right time. Sharon's point, we need to educate people why. Like, why would you do this? And really build to that communal aspect, because I think we've all historically gone, people want the lights to come on. I agree with that. People want the lights to be able to come on and afford it. That's actually where we are now. And so I think bringing in that affordability lens is really also pretty important.
Very good. So I want to reflect, first of all, just very briefly on something that Heather submitted, which is, she said there's a wonderful innovation opportunity here to motivate thousands of experiments. And at the heart of this conversation, the question's about how to achieve a better and speedier solution. And I just want to emphasize that one of the reasons that Pearcey brought Australia 4.0 to the table in the first place was because we saw the enormous opportunity for Australian innovators down here at the distribution, retail, consumer end of the market, where the complexity is scaling by, in some estimates, a factor of 10 to the 6. There's enormous opportunity for Australia to find, create, and deliver the solutions at this part of the market through the application of modern technologies, through this digitalisation effort, and in doing so, create an export opportunity for those innovators and indeed for the country that could last for decades as the rest of the world follows us through this transition. So Heather, I just want to echo very much, that's why we sort of put this all on the table. And that said, I want to go to Ian's question for you guys. He talks about what are the roles in this digitalization process? What are the roles of the digital sector technologies and techniques like open source, and I guess we have to include AI, as has already been mentioned, to enable a more collaborative approach to finding the future for our critical infrastructure. So co-design, co-implementation, co-innovation are examples that he gives. So how are we going to achieve this rapid digitalization using clever digital techniques, both commercial and technical?
So I think transparency is at the heart of it. So if we can there are people outside of the energy network who will be able to transform the energy network, because the skills required to do so actually aren't in the energy network. So I'll be less cryptic. People working in AI, that's all we do, right? We don't run an energy network. We're just at the forefront of AI. And if we can have the open access to the understanding what the grid is, then we can solve it, because we're able to bring in skill sets and capabilities that aren't available in organizations or utilities. And so we can actually frame it in completely different ways. And I think it goes to the point around, we need transparency in a way that we don't make the grid vulnerable, because I can hear the distribution businesses now saying about, well, it's critical infrastructure, etc. Well, I can recreate the grid off Nearmap today, and I can work out its points of vulnerability. So it's not that hard to do. So it's about transparency and openness, and then thinking about how can we use the technology to add value. It's all about using the tech to add value. What's the job we're trying to solve? How do we leverage the technology to do it? And not all parties have the right expertise. And so how do we bring them together to solve it in a collaborative way? I use the analogy of, if you're standing at the base of the pyramid, you can see one side, but you can't see all four. Other parts of the ecosystem can see the other parts of the sides of the pyramid. We need to come together to solve it. You can't solve it with just industry. You need other participants as well. That's my very strong view, and that's.
Yeah, I'd echo that, because one of the challenges that the electricity industry has is it's full of power engineers seeing it as a power problem, and we're moving very quickly into a data and telecommunications challenge. It's an IoT challenge, and those skill sets exist in the community and other industries, but they don't necessarily exist at scale within the electricity industry. So I do think there is an element here of the electricity industry as a whole stepping out and going, hey, we want to be a broader group, bring new skills in and recognizing it's not just a power problem to solve.
Okay. So again, I'm going to flip a couple together. So there's a statement here from an anonymous contribution that I think is, well, the primary statement is that energy should be a simple commodity, and the proposition that the NEM experiment has failed in this regards. So to serve consumers, simplicity must be regained. And so will digitalisation help us with that? But I want to combine that with Tim's question, which is more focused, but perhaps around a similar concept. Can capacity subscriptions and dynamic operating envelopes be a digital enabler for consumers?
Sorry for monopolizing, but I was going to say, I mean, I'd probably frame it slightly differently, or look at it slightly differently, in the sense that if again use the telecommunication example, you want to be able to use a mobile phone relatively easily. You don't want to know or understand or need to know the complexity of how that actual, telephone call, that data packet flows throughout the network. That's the network or the telco's problem to solve. You as the user want to interact with it with your handset, and it just works. And to a certain extent, they've done a pretty good job with that. Electricity needs to do the same way. We need to give consumers who just want to be, it's a commodity. To Sharon's point, I turn my kettle on to boil my jug. It just happens. And to Jason's point, it's cheap, cost effective for me to do that. We need to enable that. Behind the scenes, it might be quite a complex system in terms of technology, and to Tim's point about dynamic operating envelopes and all these constraints, but the consumer shouldn't see that. They shouldn't have to understand it. They shouldn't need to understand it to just turn the kettle on. And I think that's the bit that we've got to get right.
I think one thing I'll just add is, on this question of consumers, do they want an active relationship with their energy, or do they just want to treat it as a commodity and that, simple is better? There are some consumers who will never want an active relationship with their energy. They will only ever want to, it's too hard. They will only ever want to just turn it on, know that it will be reliable. But, I went and opened up our 2025 June consumer survey, and just to check the stats, 54% of people want a basic relationship, 46% of people say they want an active relationship. So, that's about half. And so there are a large number of people who want that active relationship, and we'll get a lot of benefit out of, as I said earlier, being unlocked and being able to contribute to innovation and trying new things and doing things that benefit them and benefit everybody. I probably think that I'd maybe have to think about this some more, but 50%, with more education information available to them, and if it were easier, I would expect that more people would want an active relationship. It will still never be 100%, but with more education and more data available, I think more people would want an active relationship, and that benefits everyone.
I think we started the question with simplicity. And so I think the risk with dynamic operating envelopes and VPPs is that they're complex. And particularly coming from a technical background, which is what energy comes from typically, we should be able to make it simple in that if you're able to use energy within these boundaries, it's cheaper for everyone. But if you go outside at these times, it makes it more expensive. I fear we're going to make it more complex before we make it more simple, because history tells me that's what we tend to do. I'd love to be wrong. However, the opportunity that VPPs and dynamic operating envelopes possess effectively are able to make it cheaper and more equitable for everyone.
All right. Well, let's see if we can squeeze in another one or two. Let's see. So Tim has asked, what does the panel see that the consumer's grid is actually for? Is it to drive savings, that is to lower the community cost? Or is it for businesses to make profit, which is what the VPPs and others, and gentailers, etc., seem to be about? And I'd suggest that when you respond to this, think about it within the context of the topic. How is digitalisation going to drive the answer to the consumer's grid? Or is it about savings? Is it about profit? Or the most likely answer it's going to be about a balance of the two.
Maybe I can start the conversation by reminding everyone what the national electricity objective is, which is to promote price, quality, safety, reliability, and security of supply of electricity, and reliability, safety, and security of the national electricity system, among other things. And I think that speaks to, it's really about benefiting consumers. That's why the electricity system exists. It's for the people who use electricity.
I think consumers being at the heart of the question here really acknowledges the fact that we have relied on a lot of consumers to invest, and 30-40% of households having solar means that they are they're taking matters into their own hands, and that ownership thing I think is really a key part of this debate, that we're really acknowledging that consumers are now at the heart of it because they have to invest, and a lot of the infrastructure in terms of generation is coming from the actual consumers themselves. And yeah, so that's why it has to really put them at the heart of it, and I think they're doing it in spite of everything else that's happening.
I think it's worth just recognizing that when we talk about making profit, there are the utility parts of the business that make profit, but there is a growing group of consumers who see the grid as a way to improve their financial position as well by the way they use their assets, at perhaps the expense of the wider users on the network. They manage all of their assets for their benefit.
Okay, so I'll just point out there is a question here from Anonymous about VPPs, and there's quite an active conversation going on around that one in the Slido. So I'd encourage you all to take a look at that. But as we come up close to time, I think Mark Purcell has asked a question that brings us back to the core of the topic, perhaps, for today's debate. He says, to reduce energy costs, what are the benefits between the two apparent alternatives? The centralized command and control from an aggregator using all the clever technology, or a price signal, again, obviously requiring the clever digitalization, price signal directly to the smart, he's put DER, but let's say CER, the consumer energy resource that optimizes for the consumer. So
I suppose there's two parts to that, and it depends on which bit you're trying to solve. As Jason mentioned before, from a networks perspective, the most cost-effective solution for everybody is to utilize the asset we already have, which means flattening the load curve. So if we improve utilization across the asset without having to build new ones, we've achieved reduced costs for everybody at an infrastructure level. So I suppose that's the kind of the first bit, is that you go by whatever methodology you use, whether you're talking about having some sort of, you give up some command and control for some price benefit, or you've got some sort of optimization, dynamic overload. In the end, what you want to try and do is move loads and generation around to get a nice flat profile, because that's the best use of the existing infrastructure. The second bit, I suppose, is to Michael's comment earlier today, is that local CER is the most cost-effective solution compared to stuff in the transmission network. Still going to need generation and transmission, particularly for commercial industrial at big scale. But the more you can make the distribution network sing and dance, the better you have in terms of that process. So I think it's less about a solution fixes the problem. It's more about driving the outcomes and the goals. One about, improve utilization of the infrastructure, and saying your average cost of energy drops as well.
I don't see them as being mutually exclusive, because technology can solve the different pieces. So you're going to have times where they want to do conflicting things. So because it's effectively a classic value stack, right? So you've got all these value pools and how you run, and you're just going to need some overarching rules. It's not that it's algorithmic, but it's not that hard. in terms of, and effectively let the algorithms be able to optimize for it. So I don't see them being mutually exclusive, but there will be a set of prioritizations. So for example, I can't go and do something which puts the grid stability at risk, for example, because then if we have a black one of the blacks, a black start, or we have a blackout and then a black start, that's problematic for everyone. So I actually don't see them as mutually exclusive anymore, because the effectively the AI is smart enough to solve it. That's my view now.
Great. Well, given the time, Neil, I think I will hand it back to you. You're on mute.
Thanks, Jordan, and thanks everyone for that conversation. I think that was really good and rich conversation, and we've got some really good questions. I'm not sure if we capture them and we'll publish them, Jordan, but it'd be worthwhile and some really good conversation in between there. So it's now time for a second vote. If you've still got Slido open and you go back to the polls section, we would love for you to reconsider the question as it was laid, which is, do you believe a utility-led digitisation step change is the right path for a consumer grid? If we can get you to get on there and have a vote, we've got a few people starting to flood in there now and have a go at that. That would be great. I think if we recall, we had 57% of respondents agreed with that proposition at the beginning of the day. 43% disagreed. Be interesting to see where we start to line up with that moving forward. And I think we had about 30 odd people put their hands up for this question. We've got about 21 by the looks that have voted on this so far. I don't know, Jordan, whether we're able to show the poll as it is landing at the moment.
When we show it, it sort of closes.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
But while we're giving everyone a chance, I just want to say to everybody else who put in their questions through the Slido, I'm sorry we weren't able to get to everybody, but we really do appreciate you making the time and effort to engage with the questions and with the comments to the questions.
So we were hoping to have Matt Keane with us at the end of today, and things have changed, and I think that Wayne or Ian are going to get on and have a bit of a discussion about what comes next in trying to finalise all of the 5 debates that we've had over the last 5 weeks, which have been really great debates with some really good outcomes coming together, and how we're going to synthesise what comes out of that. And as soon as we shut this down and have a look at what's going on there, I'll hand over to them and thank you for everything you've done in being part of today. I think we're stagnated there now.
Yep.
Jordan.
So you should be able to see the results on your screen now.
There we go. Oh, it didn't move a lot. It came down from 57 down to 52. So we've shifted a few of the people in the audience to disagreeing, and that's probably the discussion around meeting in the middle, or the silent majority in the middle that Jason talked about. It's been a good discussion with lots of issues surfaced, and the recording will be on the website moving forward. So with that, that's the end of the debate as it sits. I think, Wayne, are you going to have a chat now?
I'll pick up that hand, Wayne.
Right.
So thank you very much, Neil. That was really a great debate. And I think it was Simon who said the words that it's not just a power problem, and to paraphrase a little bit, a digital grid is a lot closer to a telecommunications network than a traditional power network. So that's the end. That's the end of 5 debates. And each of these debates was looking at a set of recommendations that came out of the roundtable conversation. What does success look like with Future Grid? How do we make it the consumer's grid? What standards do we need to underpin success? Skills and the new workforce, and of course today's debate, which was digitization of the grid. We will make sure that recommendations come out of each of those 5 high-level points, and certainly been informed by the debates we've had over the last 5 weeks, the last 5 Fridays. Thank you very much for participating in today's debate. And we'll also seek feedback from you around those recommendations. We want these recommendations to go to people who can use them. We've had an unusual opportunity to have so many people come together who wouldn't necessarily come together to discuss these issues. And over the last 4 years, we've literally engaged thousands of people and hundreds of organizations. Those recommendations that we shape up, we'll test with you. And of course, what happens next? It's always a matter of working out how we can be most effective going forward. But certainly the distilled output of 4 years worth of discussions are going to be recommendations which are essentially tried, tested, and debated, literally debated. So thank you very much for your contribution today. And with that, I might hand over to you, Wayne, to close us out. And if not, Wayne?
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes, we
Right.
can. All good.
Back in 2023, many of you participated in the early sessions of Australia 4. We shared a matrix approach to start those discussions, but eventually we settled on focusing on the distribution of data issues associated with the electricity network. We studiously avoided discussing or debating the sources of energy, but recognised that the consumer could be a generator, consumer, and a storage device concurrently. I mean, it may look self-evident now, but 4 years ago, we were struggling to make sure we focused our discussions. We tried to better understand what this means for the electricity network. We did that original work over 7 Zoom sessions chaired by many eminent practitioners we all recognise, and many of whom are likely participating in this session today. You may recall our goal was to identify the key challenges our industry faces in the transition towards net zero and the opportunities these might generate for Australia. One of the key revelations to me personally arising from these fascinating and informative discussions, which is quite self-evident now, was how the consumer's agency in this transition is, continues to be, and must be respected and embraced. These most recent 5 debates were not positioned as solutions to the challenges we identified earlier. Rather, they focused on what the key recommendations might be from the ICT sector on making a successful transition. For sure, we reinforced the notion that this is a very complicated, multi-dimensional process, but that notion must not deter us individually and collectively from having a go to make it work for our nation. As Ian has highlighted, we will summarise the key discussion points arising from these debates and share with you shortly. The Australia 4 Committee is intentionally a fairly invisible group. There's 5 of us in all. However, we hope we have demonstrated that collaboration can work in Australia if we clearly identify a set of goals that we can all buy into to make this transition work. We must not miss this opportunity to hold robust debate on matters critical to achieving a great outcome for our nation that will benefit us all short-term and long-term. Thank you to all of you for participating in these sessions. You will be hearing from us shortly with the summaries and what happens next. All the best and thanks again for your contribution to Australia 4. Thank you.